Well, hey there, this is Dr. David Jockers, and today I'm doing a deep investigation into the organic acids test. This is a very powerful functional health test that really lets you know what's happening with your mitochondria, what's happening in different areas of your gut. Are you being exposed to mold? Your neurotransmitter function, how well are your neurotransmitters functioning, certain B vitamin metabolites, markers of detoxification. There's so much good information that comes from an organic acids test. And so we're going to go through that. We're going to go through a lot of these markers. I'm not going to go through every single marker, but we're going to go through like the main sections and what different markers mean. I'm also going to give recommendations if you're seeing, higher or low levels of these markers. But I do want you guys to know that this video is not meant to diagnose, treat, or cure any medical condition, and it's for informational purposes only. The video is not a treatment protocol, and it does not replace a consultation with a healthcare practitioner. You are fully responsible for what you do or don't do with the information in this presentation. And so we look at this, we know that an organic acid test is a super simple test. It is a morning urine. So you wake up in the morning, you urinate in a collection tube, and then basically you pour that into a smaller tube, and that's pretty much, and then you just send it out. And that's pretty much how it works. Now, you do want to avoid certain foods. Some of these foods are higher in salicylates, which can affect the markers on the test. And so they can elevate certain markers that, will skew the results. So, there's certain recommendations as far as foods that take place. And then when we're looking at these findings, we're looking at certain vitamin and mineral sufficiencies or insufficiencies. We're looking at glutathione levels. We're looking at carnitine, which is a really critical compound that helps bring fatty acids into the mitochondria to be used for energy. So we're looking at that. We're looking at B vitamins. We're looking at mitochondrial function, neurotransmitters. We're looking at markers for dysbiosis or bad bacterial balance, yeast, mold. So all of those types of things. And so what kind of conditions can benefit from this test? Pretty much almost every condition. If you're having certain mood disorders, neurological disorders, if you're having digestive issues, if you're having, skin outbreaks, weight gain that just won't go away, inflammation, pain, fatigue, then this test can really reveal some interesting findings that can help you on your health journey. So main sections of an organic acid test, and we're going to go through this pretty much in order. Intestinal microbial overgrowth, we're going to look at that first. Oxalate metabolism, glycolytic cell metabolism, which is basically the ability of the cells to break down sugar. Oxalates are little crystals that come from plant compounds, and they can also be produced in the body. So we're going to go through that. Mitochondrial markers, your mitochondria produce all the energy in your body. And so there's Krebs cell metabolites, and there's amino acid metabolites there. There's neurotransmitter metabolites, which are things like serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine, which help to really help control your mood and your goal setting, your ability to stay focused. We're going to look at folate metabolism. We're going to look at ketone and fatty acid metabolism, nutritional markers, indicators of detoxification, minerals, fluid intake, and hydration levels here. So we're going to start with this, with looking at intestinal microbial growth. And so this will say intestinal microbial overgrowth. Now, we don't necessarily know where, so we can't necessarily say, there's conditions like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and small intestinal fungal overgrowth. We don't necessarily know if it's in the small intestine or not. We just know that, when we're seeing some of these markers high, that there's an overgrowth. And you can see marker 2, 4, 5, and 6 are all markers for a certain type of mold called Aspergillus. So it could be a household mold exposure, and Aspergillus also can be on foods. Like, for example, a lot of nuts and seeds and grains can be contaminated. Peanuts are, notorious for having Aspergillus on them. So this could be elevated due to foods. You're eating foods that are contaminated with these mold toxins, or it could be that you're breathing them in your house or your office or your car. So, if we're seeing number 2, 4, 5, and 6 elevated, we definitely want to look at that in more detail. There is a mycotoxin test that this company, or Great Plains Labs, that we're looking at with the organic acid, also offers. You can look at that in more detail. You can also Get your home cleaned up, right? Get your home cleaned up for mold, have somebody come out and look at it. Get air purifiers like the air doctor, which can help as well. The other markers are yeast markers that we're looking at, or, particularly the one that's most specific is number 7 there, the arabinose. That's most sensitive for Candida overgrowth. Normally, we want that, under 20. If it's between 20 and 100, it's mild Candida overgrowth. So you can see, this marker here, we want it less than 20. For this particular test, it's at 12. That's good. That's a good measurement there. That means that there's not much. We always have some Candida, and this is arabinose is a breakdown product of Candida's energy metabolism. So we always have some. You're not going to find 0. However, we want to keep that Candida in check. And so when we keep it in check, we see that number low. If it's between 20 and 100, it's mild Candida overgrowth. If it's over 100, it's, pretty significant. Well, it's certainly marked for Candida overgrowth, and over 150, it's significant Candida overgrowth in the body, and Candida can cause a lot of different problems. So, it's a significant marker because Candida releases different toxins that affect the brain, like gliotoxin and acetaldehyde that can cause almost like an alcohol type effect on the brain and cause brain fog and moodiness and trouble with memory. Candida can cause a lot of different issues. So if we see significant Candida overgrowth, we want to address it. Again, marker 2 through 6, markers for aspergillus, food or the environment. And then there's tricarboxylic, which is at marker 9. It's a marker for fusarium mold, which is a different type of mold that will show. Now, here's another thing that you can do at home. It's called the Candida spit test. Basically, you just wake up in the morning, you don't drink any water, you spit in a cup of water, and you kind of watch to see what happens. Your saliva really should stay at the top in a cohesive bulb. If you see strings traveling down into the water from the saliva, cloudy specks or cloudy saliva in there that sinks to the bottom of the glass, that can be a Candida problem. So that's another thing that you can look at. Now, Candida treatment options. Candida loves sugar and starch. So typically we do a low carb diet. We'll do intermittent fasting to help starve down the Candida and make it more vulnerable. And we'll hit it with antimicrobials, things like olive leaf, oregano, caprylic acid, pau d'arco, astragalus, ginger, turmeric. So there's specific supplements that have these. You can also drink teas. Pau d'arco tea is a popular one. Caprylic acid is basically your C8 MCT oil, and that can be really effective against this. And then for breaking down biofilms, oftentimes we'll use different types of proteolytic enzymes, which are protein metabolizing enzymes. Candida and other microbes can create basically like an outer protein shell to protect themselves in a harsh environment. So when these antimicrobials start coming in, they want to protect themselves and hunker down. So they form this protein shield. The proteolytic enzymes can help metabolize that, make them more vulnerable. And then you can use binders to help grab them and grab particularly their endotoxins, their waste products that they're releasing. So charcoal works great, clay, zeolite, fulvic and humic acids. So, practitioner can really put together a protocol, but these are different compounds that can be very helpful. Mold treatment, of course, you want to get out of moldy environment. You want to use different air filtration methods like the air doctor. Reduce mycotoxins in your diet. So again, grains, corn, soy, nuts and seeds, legumes. Coffee can be a big factor too. So you're looking for a coffee that's been tested and mycotoxin free. I like Four Sigmatic and Life Boost coffee. Those are 2 very good ones that are mycotoxin free. You want to boost glutathione. Glutathione is a key part of phase 2 liver detox. So you can take liposomal glutathione or acetylated glutathione, or you can take a precursor, excuse me, N-acetylcysteine, NAC is a precursor. Cysteine is the critical amino acid in glutathione. And so it helps boost up glutathione. And then binders also for mold, charcoal, clay, zeolite, fulvic and humic acids. And you can even find, specific types of binders that may even be labeled, specifically for mold. Now let's look at bacterial markers here. So you've got things like hippuric acid and 2-hydroxyphenolic acetic acid. So you can see all these different markers, DHPPA, which you can see has in parentheses a marker for beneficial bacteria. So if you're taking probiotics, a lot of times the DHPPA will go up. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll have my clients just not take probiotics for about 2 days before doing this test, just to make sure that that's not, falsely elevated. It's typically not an issue if it is elevated, but, in some cases, if you have too much, even beneficial bacteria in the wrong places, it can cause problems. And then you can also see that there's Clostridia bacterial markers. So specific markers that are specific for different types of Clostridia species. 4-cresol is a marker that's very specific for Clostridia difficile, which when that's overgrown, that's a normal inhabitant of our gut. But when it's overgrown, it can cause a lot of different problems, particularly a lot of issues with the brain, a lot of issues with gut. And, there's a growing condition specifically in hospitals of C. diff that is antibiotic resistant. And so this test will help look at some of that. Now, hippuric elevations, when we see that first marker there, hippuric, could be due to beneficial bacterial overgrowth, but it can also be related to phase 2 liver detoxification issues. So if we're not glycinating things, or if we don't have enough glycine, that's very important for amino acid conjugation, we can end up with elevated hippuric. And there's another marker that we're going to talk about later, hydroxyhippuric, that can be elevated if we have poor phase 2 liver detox. DHPP, again, elevation, a sign of beneficial bacterial overgrowth. Some of those other markers can be just signs of overall bacterial overgrowth in the system, not specific to any one species. But then we do have Clostridia markers, and we have the 4-cresol. Okay, and there's HPHPA as well. Let me jump back up here. Okay, so that HPHPA number 16 and then number 17, 4-cresol. Elevations block conversion of dopamine to epinephrine in the brain. You'll see high HVA on the lab, and we'll get to that marker. And the issue there is that's been associated with more neurological inflammation. And so conditions like, for example, autism, ADHD, people are finding some of these markers elevated in certain cases, not always, but in certain cases. Clostridia species. So here are some of the options. It's best to attack it every day for 2 weeks, and then every third day with antimicrobials and biofilm agents. So with that, they can develop really strong biofilms. And so you hit it hard for 2 weeks, it's going to hunker down, but then you hit it every third day, and it's more vulnerable that way. So oftentimes what we'll do is we'll get the yeast first. So we'll hit the yeast first, and then we'll go and go for the Clostridia after that. Antimicrobials, very similar to yeast. Oil of oregano tends to be very, very good on this. Olive leaf, garlic, berberine, clove, neem, barberry, sweet wormwood, or artemisinin can all be effective. Again, biofilm agents like proteolytic enzymes could be helpful. And then binders, right? So using binders again to help grab toxins that are released by the Clostridia, and grab up, some of these microbes, charcoal, clay, zeolite, fulvic, humic acids. And then in between using the antimicrobials, you can also use probiotics, things like Saccharomyces boulardii, for example. The beneficial yeast has been shown to be effective against Clostridia. So getting some probiotics into the system as well is really important. Now, oxalate metabolites. And so this is really another important thing that we're looking at are oxalates. And so oxalates, again, are these crystals that come from plant compounds that can drive up inflammation in the body. They can increase your risk of kidney stones, for example. And a lot of people, when they have elevated oxalates, will have more issues with their gut and also issues with their brain. So they can impact the brain as well. So that's one of the big things we're looking at here. Now, we'll get to these glycolytic cycle metabolites and the mitochondrial markers as well. But first, we're looking at those oxalate metabolites. And marker 19 and 20, glyceric and glycolytic, if those are elevated, it's a sign that genetically you may have just a much greater propensity towards high oxalates. And so that could be, really give you a window into saying, okay, I need to really reduce oxalate foods and possibly for life, as opposed to if your oxalates are elevated, but the glyceric and glycolic are not elevated. You may just need to reduce it for a period of time. You may need to take some certain binders, like citrate binders and things like that, that help with it. You may need to elevate your B6. And so, again, looking at these things, oxalic acid, it's an extremely acidic organic acid that traps heavy metals and deposits in a variety of tissues throughout the body. So it can also grab heavy metals in the gut and redistribute them, which can be an issue here. Pyridoxic acid, which we're going to look at later, that's a major metabolite of B6. High amounts of B6 shunt oxalate precursors to the formation of glycine instead of oxalic acid. So B6 is key for the metabolism of oxalic acid. If you're deficient in B6, you can end up with more problems. Glycolic acid is a byproduct of CANDIDA, found when CANDIDA enzyme collagenase converts hydroxyproline to glycolytic acid. It's found elevated also in people that have genetic hyperoxaluria type 1. So again, these are some genetic components, but also if you just see glycolic acid elevated, but not glyceric acid, then that could be related to elevated oxalates due to CANDIDA. So look at those CANDIDA markers. Again, arabinose, tartaric acid, CANDIDA markers, 5-hydroxymethylfuroic acid. That's a metabolite of fungi as aspergillus. So these different funguses also can elevate, or molds can elevate oxalates as well. So these are the key markers that you want to look at when you're analyzing oxalate metabolism. Now, high oxalate foods, many of these foods are going to disappoint you guys. In general, we consider these healthy foods, but they're high in oxalates. And if you're having an oxalate metabolism problem, they're not healthy for you, at least not now. So potatoes, yams, beans, rhubarb, nuts and seeds, beets, raspberries, dark chocolate. Oh my gosh, don't take away the dark chocolate. Swiss chard. So a lot of these things, we want to reduce the amount. Now, when we're reducing, you don't necessarily want to just take them all out. You want to reduce your consumption in half. So if you normally are consuming, let's say 10 servings of those a week, reduce it to about a half or 5. Some people can have problems with oxalate dumping where they reduce oxalates too much too quickly. And that can be an issue. And that's why I like binders like activated charcoal, which works well to bind oxalates in the gut. Also citrates. So binders and citrates like magnesium, calcium, or potassium citrate help bind to oxalates. Citrus fruit like lemons and limes, putting that on your food, has natural citrates in it, which can help bind. The citrate will bind to the oxalate, help move the oxalate out of your system. Vitamin B6, if you're deficient there, you really want to supplement with B6. Ideally, the P5P version, pyridoxine 5-pyridoxal, which is the activated version of B6. And then also those higher oxalate veggies that we talked about, so really any green leafy vegetable, I would say. It's actually better to cook it. It will actually reduce some of those oxalate levels as opposed to just kind of eating that raw. So that's another idea there as well. Address candida or mold, of course, we talked about that. Improve bioflow. This is actually something that most practitioners are not really addressing when it comes to oxalates. So if you're seeing high oxalates in the gut, sometimes because we are not moving them out, right? So bile should normally move them, grab them, move them out through the feces. So you may need more bile salts like taurine, choline, and TUDCA, which can help move those out of the system. Now, with oxalates, you don't want to do high dose vitamin C. So high dose vitamin C can cause you to retain more oxalates. So if you have high oxalates, then you don't want to do more than 2 grams, which is a high dose of vitamin C daily, at least not for, a very long period of time. So like, let's say you have a cold, you might do it for 3 days, but this is not something you want to do on a regular basis because it will cause more oxalate concentration to develop. You want to hydrate well, super important. And then probiotics can also help support oxalate metabolism and support your overall gut microbiomes. That's something to consider too. Now let's look at mitochondria. Mitochondria are important for producing all the energy in the body, right? So they're the little energy machines within the cell but they're also they're cell stress responders, or they're like, trying to think of the word. So they are basically thinking through what's happening with the cell and changing their structure based on if the cell is under stress, if there's infection, things like that. It's going to actually, they're going to alter their function based around those things. We used to think that they were just kind of little engines that would be damaged by oxidative stress. And when they got damaged, they would start to malfunction. Now we realize they're actually very intelligent, and they actually change their structure based around these stressors that are being put on the cells of our body. But they're so important, and we can actually look at what's happening with the mitochondria by looking at certain markers. So lactic and pyruvic acid are markers of sugar metabolism, right? So we've heard of lactic acid, for example, when we are producing energy in an anaerobic state, like when you're exercising at a high intensity and you don't have enough oxygen. We produce a lot of energy through glycolysis, which is breaking down sugar. And we produce a lot of lactic acid. And that's where we feel the burn. Now, normally we convert lactic acid into pyruvic acid, and then pyruvic acid moves into the Krebs cycle, right, where it gets turned into a whole lot of ATP and cellular energy. However, if you're exercising at a high intensity, or if you're deficient in certain nutrients like magnesium and B vitamins like vitamin B2 and stuff like that, then you may not be able to turn lactic acid into pyruvic acid, and therefore you're going to be very energy inefficient. So, and your system is going to be very dependent upon sugar metabolism, which means you're going to end up with hypoglycemia, lower energy, fatigue, more inflammation in your body, a lot of different problems there. So I know this is a complex chart right here, but we're looking at the metabolism of carbohydrates, fatty acids, proteins. You can see that Mg, kind of right there at the top, is magnesium. We need magnesium for all forms of metabolism. To turn anything into energy, we need magnesium. To turn protein into amino acids that can be metabolized into energy, we need magnesium. Carbohydrates, we need magnesium. See, magnesium creates pyruvic acid, which, pyruvic acid will turn into lactic acid if it doesn't have oxygen, right? Or if it doesn't have certain B vitamins. So when we have the B vitamins and oxygen, it will turn it into acetyl-CoA, right? And acetyl-CoA then can move into and turn into either ketones, or it can go into the Krebs cycle there and produce energy that way. And then fatty acids, we're going to come back to that, but fatty acids also need magnesium, vitamin B2 to get into beta oxidation, move into acetyl-CoA, and then go into the Krebs cycle again, where they're basically creating energy. And so very important, we have got these B vitamins, we've got magnesium. And so some of the markers we're looking at: amino acid metabolites, 3-methylglutaric, 3-hydroxyglutaric, 3-methylglutaconic. And so again, if these markers are elevated, could be issues with mitochondrial function in general, could be issues with magnesium deficiency, could play a role here, and just overall energy production, right, with that. Now, with these other markers, we're looking at like succinic, fumaric, malic acid, 2-hydroxyglutaric, citric acid. So all of those right there, those would be, basically they're all very, very important parts of, go right in here, in the Krebs cycle. So if you see this spinning wheel right here on the right side, you'll see succinic acid, alpha ketogluteric acid, acetonic acid, citric acid, right? So you'll see all of those, fumaric acid. So again, if those are elevated, they're spilling out of that, meaning they're not being converted. So you can see magnesium is key, B vitamins, B1, 2, 3, all very important here, B6, all very important parts of this whole cycle right here. And so that's what we're looking at there. And yeah, back to this chart right here. So you can see on the left-hand side, acetyl-CoA comes in, it turns into citrate, turns into cis, aconitate, isocitrate, right? So it just goes through this cycle. And this is showing that CANDIDA, right? Heavy metals, different things like that can affect the breakdown products here, right? So it affects all the breakdown products that are taking place with the Krebs cycle. So mitochondrial markers, mold, dysbiosis, so mold exposure, if we have bad bacterial balance, if we have insulin resistance, right? So we might see high lactic and pyruvate, for example, but the inability to get those into the mitochondria with insulin resistance, toxins, these can all cause problems. So again, the glycolytic cell metabolites, they're how we burn sugar for fuel. Magnesium and B vitamins are needed. And again, if we're seeing those high, it could be an indicator for insulin resistance. Krebs cycle metabolites, so like citric acid, high yeast, high citric acid in your diet. So if you're doing like a lot of lemons and limes, or you're taking supplemental citrate, like for example, the citrate, we know that binds to the oxalates. So I've put a lot of people on like magnesium, potassium citrate to help get rid of or bind and move the oxalates out. And so sometimes when we retest, those people might have high citric acid. But if that's the only Krebs cycle metabolite that I'm seeing elevated, then I'm not concerned about it. Okay. But if I'm seeing a whole bunch, right, then that could be an issue. Citric acid can also be elevated if we are deficient in glutathione. So we can look at that along with other glutathione markers. Succinic acid. So I see this elevated a lot. It's oftentimes a sign that we need more B vitamins like B2, and also CoQ10 is a factor there too. And if we're seeing a bunch of mitochondrial markers, it is a sign that our mitochondria are in the cell danger response. They're not functioning well. And what is a cell danger response? It's a natural process in which our mitochondria protect and defend themselves and our bodies from threats such as infections, toxins, physical and psychological trauma, and other environmental stressors. So when we have all of these stressors, the mitochondria themselves slow down. They become hypometabolic, and they actually create oxidative stress as a shield. And so what we've got to do is start to eliminate toxins, chemicals, glyphosate, metals, different things like that, different infections that may be affecting it, viruses and bacteria and different things like that, trauma, psychological or physical trauma. So a lot of these things are impacting it. Now, when we get mitochondrial dysfunction, again, there could be a number of different factors here. We could have stress, high stress and sleep deprivation can cause this. Sugar and processed foods, environmental toxins, radiation is a factor, chronic infections, aging, inflammation and hyperglycemia, so high blood sugar. Genetic predisposition can also be a factor, and sedentary lifestyle. So we want to address all of these things in order to allow the mitochondria to function optimally. Now, key nutrients that support mitochondrial health: alpha lipoic acid, omega-3 fats, glucosamine, N-acetylcysteine. We talked about that earlier. N-acetylcysteine is really, a key precursor to boost up glutathione. Creatine monohydrate, right? A lot of athletes use this for muscle growth and energy. It's very important for mitochondrial function. Resveratrol, really powerful antioxidant that supports mitochondrial function. Quercetin, green tea, different B vitamins. Really, all of our B vitamins are important players in overall mitochondrial health, particularly NAD, or nicotinamide riboside, can be very powerful here. Acetyl L-carnitine, very important for basically getting fatty acids into the mitochondria to be used for energy. And then coenzyme Q10 plays a critical role. I mean, that's really, the carrier. It's carrying electrons between all the different complexes in the mitochondrial respiratory chain for energy production. And so very important nutrients that we're getting to support mitochondrial function. And all of those, along with removing the toxins, removing the threats on the cell, help support and rebuild mitochondrial health. And so again, going back to the amino acid metabolites, again, same thing. We're looking at that. We're thinking, okay, is our cells in the danger response or not? Or are we functioning well? Neurotransmitter metabolites. So we're looking at HVA, VMA, this homovinylic, mandelic. So these are markers of dopamine, norepinephrine. And then we've got DOPAC, which is also a dopamine marker. And we've got different ratios there as well that look at how well we're converting HVA into VMA, which could be a sign, if we're not converting that well, it could be a sign of vitamin C or copper, which are needed for that, of a deficiency there. We're also looking at the tryptophan metabolites, 5-HIAA, which is a marker for serotonin production. And then also, B6 deficiency can cause that to be low as well. So we want enough 5-HIAA. And then those markers 39 and 40, quinolinic and kynureninic, if they're elevated, that's a sign of inflammation in the brain. So a lot of brain inflammation. Now, this is a diagram right here. And again, I know this is a lot of stuff, but you can see there at the top, tryptophan converts into 5-HTP, into serotonin, and 5-HIAA. However, it can also tryptophan, that amino acid, if we're under a lot of immune stimulation, stress, infection, maybe you had trauma to your brain, which would cause more inflammation and immune stimulation. It can turn into quinolinic, which is neurotoxic. And so it's a sign of inflammation in the brain. So now, as we look lower here, we're looking at breakdown markers or amino acids that are turning into dopamine. Phenylalanine and tyrosine are precursors. And so when we have Clostridia, right? Clostridia or C. difficile, these markers we talked about earlier, HPA and 4-cresol, they inhibit this key enzyme, dopamine beta hydroxylase, which is important for turning dopamine into norepinephrine or adrenaline. And we need a good balance there. That really helps us think sharply and quickly. If we have too much dopamine, then we end up with more inflammation in the brain and an inability to really stay focused and concentrated. And it's been associated with, different types of mood disorders and neurological disorders. So we really want that to be at the optimal level. And this is a kind of another chart that shows this here, where that dopamine beta hydroxylase is that critical enzyme that turns dopamine into norepinephrine. And that breakdown product of that is the VMA. So the HVA is the breakdown product of dopamine. The VMA is a breakdown product of norepinephrine. So going back to this chart here, you could see the HVA and the VMA. We want those to be, at a good level, and we want that ratio to be at a good level. And so when it's not, that could be a sign, again, of some different issues. And so let's go into that. Low HVA and VMA. So when they're both low, it's usually linked to dysbiosis, chronic stress. So if you're not producing enough dopamine and epinephrine, that can be because your system is depleted. So chronic stress, toxins, or certain amino acids like tyrosine, phenylalanine. If you're deficient in those, if you're deficient in magnesium or different B vitamins like B6, for example, that can all be linked with low HVA VMA. So typically when I see that, I obviously want to address root causes like infections and toxins, get stress under control. And then usually I'm supplementing with magnesium, possibly some B vitamins, but definitely magnesium. High HVA, often related to chronic infections, toxins, or heavy metals. So if we just see high HVA flagged, we really need to be thinking infections, toxins, heavy metals. Also could be poor salicylate metabolism, phase 2 liver detox, right? So you may have an issue with high salicylates and poor salicylate metabolism. So we'll see that sometimes. High DOPAC, possibly related to C. diff, salicylate metabolism again. So if we're seeing all of those elevated, high toxin and heavy metals, and increased phenylalanine. So we may be supplementing with the phenylalanine or tyrosine. Low 5-HIAA, that's a low serotonin marker, just like we talked about, related to stress and dysbiosis. Could be B6 deficiency. Taking supplements with 5-HTP oftentimes helps that person a lot. So I've seen that in many cases. High quinolinic acid, again, brain inflammation. That's what I'm thinking. It can be caused from infections that have gotten into the brain or toxins like phthalates, which we find in plastic, for example. BPA would be a phthalate. Lead and other heavy metals. Those are the two that are most well associated, phthalates and lead. But could also be from tryptophan supplementation. So I don't recommend supplementing with tryptophan. It's better to supplement with 5-HTP because that's already gone through one conversion step and is not going to turn into quinolinic acid. So if you see high quinolinic acid, magnesium again, omega-3 fats can be helpful here, curcumin, glutathione, so like liposomal glutathione or acetylated or NAC, and also different B vitamins like B6 can be really helpful here. High kynureninic, normal levels are neuroprotectant. So kynurenic's important that we have good normal levels there. But if it's high, it can cause problems. And that could result from a B6 deficiency, immune stimulation, or tryptophan supplementation. So that could be an issue. Let's see. So tryptophan, again, kynurenic and quinolinic acid. So there's this whole relationship here. And if we're producing too much quinolinic acid, it's a sign of neurotoxicity that's taking place. So let's talk about folate metabolism. Uracil and thymidine are looking at folate metabolism. And so if these markers right here, if they are flagged, then that can be a sign of MTHFR or poor, not enough folate in the diet. You may need to supplement. So that's a marker there. And then also here, we're looking at ketones and fatty acids, and we'll come back to that just a second. But looking at these pyrimidine metabolites, again, indicates problems with methylation, which is part of phase 2 liver detox. And all the cells also undergo methylation. And folate metabolism, again, can be related to MTHFR gene mutation, can also result in high homocysteine. So if I see that, we also want to look at homocysteine. And there's actually a marker that we're going to go through when we look at the detox markers as well, that looks at how your body's metabolizing homocysteine too. So in some cases with this, methylfolate or folinic acid supplementation may be warranted. Again, now, as we slide down, we're looking at ketones and fatty acids. So marker 43 and 44, totally normal to have high if you're following a low carb or ketogenic diet. However, if you're diabetic and you haven't been following that, then that's a sign that you're extremely insulin resistant and could be a major problem. Now, the only markers there that I really look at that could be more of an issue are number 47 and 48. And that's adipic and subaric. Okay. Those are more, significant markers. And so let's talk about that. Those can be an issue with fatty acid oxidation. They could be an issue with magnesium or B2 deficiency. So again, we want to look at other markers that could be related to magnesium or B2 deficiency. And also, if we have a lot of oxidative stress, it will damage our fatty acid metabolism. So it could also be markers of basically, inflammation and oxidative stress. If on a moderate to high carb diet, these values, like if you see any of those values, if somebody's following a high carb diet, they can indicate insulin resistance and lipid membrane peroxidation. So we have membranes around, we have lipid membranes, bilipid layer around every cell of the body. And we can have oxidative stress that damages that lipid membrane. And some of these metabolites can be elevated with that. So, if we're seeing a lot of those, that can definitely be a sign of basically inflammation affecting our cells, right? And so definitely a big issue, especially if we're seeing that and mitochondrial markers, definitely something to be concerned about. Body's really breaking itself down. So again, going back to this chart up here at the top where it says fatty acids, if we don't have enough magnesium and B2, we end up with high amounts of adipic and subaric acid in our urine. And so that's going to show up there. So that's why we need those. So again, reasons for elevated ketones on an OAT test. Number one would be being in ketosis, which is a healthy marker. That's a good thing. But you could also have poor fat absorption too. Microbial dysbiosis, high oxalates, sluggish gallbladder can all cause problems here. Lipid oxidation, so oxidative stress damaging the cell membranes. So those are all markers, all things that we need to look at. So gallbladder, if we have high oxalates, that can cause problems there, dysbiosis. So you're looking at this test from a holistic perspective. That's one of the big keys here. We're looking at this holistically, not just in segments, even though, of course, right now, as we're doing this, we're looking at it in segments. You're comparing it with other markers to look for patterns. So nutritional markers, and you can see the asterisk there next to the vitamin B12 marker, methylmalonic. That means that if that marker is high, Okay, that's what the asterisk means. If it's high methylmalonic, it means that we have a B12 deficiency. So, so you're looking to see if that's high. Same thing with B2, the glutaric acid marker. If that's high, it's a B2 issue. If the vitamin Q10, the 3-hydroxy 3-methyl glutaric acid is high, that's a CoQ10 deficiency. And our vitamin H, our methyl citric, if that's high, then that's a biotin deficiency. So for those markers, if it's high, it's deficiency. If it's low, it's fine. But the other markers, obviously, we're looking at if they're high or low. So we also have markers of detoxification. So glutathione marker here, pyroglutamic, again, asterisk there. So if it's high, it's elevated. And that's a sign that we're depleting our glutathione. And in phase 2 liver detox, we have several different pathways. Glutathione is extremely key. We also have methylation. So the next marker, and this is also the marker with homocysteine, the 2-hydroxybutyric. So a good one to look at with our pyrimidine metabolites, our uracil and our thiamine, those markers, and compare them with what's happening here with the 2-hydroxybutyric acid, because that's a marker for methylation. And so we're looking at that. Now, ammonia, if we have high ammonia, that we're looking at with orotic acid. Okay. So high ammonia is definitely not a good issue either, right? So that could be a metabolism issue that, definitely needs to be addressed. Ammonia can be extremely neurotoxic. And then the 2-hydroxy herpuric acid is a sign of how well we're breaking down salicylates. And if we have dysbiosis in our gut, or if we're consuming like high amounts of aspartame or high amounts of aspirin or aspartame. So the sweetener aspartame and the drug aspirin, that can elevate this marker. And also if we have gut dysbiosis, it can elevate that marker as well. So let's look at this high pyroglutamic. Again, that's a sign of low glutathione levels. So supplementing with NAC, or if you've been supplementing with NAC and you're still seeing that high, certainly switching to a liposomal glutathione or acetylated glutathione that can get right into the cell rather than trying to depend on the conversion process may be really helpful. High 2-hydroxybutyric, again, that's that marker that is associated with homocysteine. Could be a sign of poor phase 2 liver detoxification related to methylation. Also, glutathione can be an issue. And you may also have certain genes like the CBS gene that can be elevated that might drive that as well. High orotic acid, oftentimes liver or kidney problems, gut dysbiosis can contribute to this, or drug or alcohol toxicity can also be related to high orotic acid there. So you may have a lot of ammonia producing bacteria. So we may need to really improve your bile flow to help move some of those things out, improve your stomach acid levels, possibly some antimicrobials. So, we're going to compare that with the dysbiosis markers. And then the high 2-hydroxy herpuric acid, poor phase 2 liver detoxification. So we may need a lot more glycine. Gut dysbiosis, high salicylate or high aspirin or aspartame exposure can elevate this. So there is such a thing as, a low salicylate diet. So we can find salicylates in a lot of common foods. In fact, cranberries, apples, all those things that we're taking out in the beginning, when I showed you guys that, those are higher in salicylates. And so, look into that, look into a lower salicylate diet, which unfortunately is a lot of like fruit, right? And chocolate and stuff like that. But, doing it maybe for a short period of time while you boost your phase 2 liver detox, you might see huge improvements. A lot of kids with ADHD and different types of issues like that, autism, have seen really good results based around what they found on this test, the organic acid test, and then, following a low salicylate diet because the markers indicated that. So detoxification pathways in the liver. Step 1, okay, we need B vitamins, folate, glutathione, antioxidants. And this is the cytochrome P450 enzymes that are taking a fat soluble toxin, turning it, basically converting it. And then we need to conjugate it in step 2. So we need to deactivate it. So unfortunately, step 1 can actually make it more toxic. So if we don't have good phase 2 detoxification with glycine, glutamine, taurine, cysteine, methionine, these sorts of amino acids, because we have all these processes: sulfuration, glycination, glucuronidation, acetylation. So we have all these, and glutathione conjugation. So we have all these pathways that we, need amino acids for. We need sulfur, we need selenium, we need magnesium, B12, molybdenum for the sulfur pathway, in order to really move these things through. And then we finally eliminate toxins through our skin, through our bile, which flows out through our bowel, and then through our kidneys and our urine. So very important that we have these processes going. So the process of glycination is one that the organic acid test can pick up. And so it's important for salicylates, breaking down benzoic acid, phenylacetic acid, which you can find in like processed foods and certain drinks and stuff, and some cosmetics and things like that. Key nutrients needed: glycine, B6, magnesium. So all these things are important. And you can see, look at the list of warning signs of poor glycination, right? Lethargy, hyperactivity, skin rashes, and eczema. It doesn't mean all of these are related to that, but commonly these issues can be related to poor glycination or amino acid conjugation with glycine. So important that we're looking at that. Now we'll finish up here with amino acid metabolites, and then also phosphoric, which is part of the mineral metabolism. So phosphoric is very low. Then we're thinking vitamin D and magnesium, right? That we want to address that. Could be a sign of bone loss. And so vitamin D and magnesium are big players there. And then with the amino acid metabolites, just in general, if we're seeing high amino acid metabolites, it could be some sort of inborn genetic error. You're not going to see this too often, so it's a good thing to look at. The one that you may see would be Mandelic 68. Okay. That can be high due to exposure to styrene, plastic, and styrofoam. Okay. So that one right there could be related to toxicity. Markers 62, 65, and 66, right? So if we look at those, if we're seeing that, it could be a B1 deficiency or alpha lipoic acid deficiency. So look at those things. Markers 69 and 70 can indicate increased dietary phenylalanine intake. And you're going to find phenylalanine in foods like cheese, nuts, seeds, beef, eggs, and other foods. And also sometimes people are supplementing in order to improve their cognition with phenylalanine because it's a dopamine precursor. So there are supplements that have phenylalanine to help support dopamine production. And so if you're supplementing with that, you may see those markers elevated on the test as well. So all good things to be looking at. And hopefully, guys, this is a helpful training for you. It really gives you a good insight into what's happening here on the organic acid test. So, have a few listens if you didn't quite get this, and would love to hear your input. So thanks, guys, and we'll see you guys in a future video. Be blessed.